So Kirsten, last time we spoke, we ended up with the question, what's a good process? Now I want to change that up slightly.
Okay.
To what makes a good process?
Okay. Well, technically, there are a few things. So a good process is dedicated to achieving a single customer meaningful, business meaningful outcome. So it's doing one thing. That one thing can be quite big and abstract at the top level, so keep promise. And you can increase in granularity, so walk dogs, until you reach the lowest practical level, which might be something like file VAT return. Okay? Next thing, a good process is managed by a single role from start to finish. Other roles might help, they might get involved, but only one is responsible for the whole thing. Thirdly, a good process, it's a bit like a map. It guides the person to the destination, to the outcome that you want, but it allows flexibility of route to get there. So they know where they're heading for and they can choose different ways to get there. But it also has a compass built in, because you are going to get lost in the dark at some point, because no process can predict every eventuality, and the compass reminds the person running that process of the promise of value that you're trying to deliver, and that means they will know the kind of thing they need to do to get back on track. Okay? Lastly, a good process is a prompt, not a prescription. It's like a musical score or a set of building drawings. It tells people what to produce, not how to do it. They already know how to do it because that's why you hired them or trained them.
So give me an example of how that would work then.
Okay, take dog walking. So for my dog walking client, the process we put in place for running a dog walk takes the dog walker through what they need to do to turn up at a house, collect a dog, turn up at the next house, collect a dog, take them all to the park for the walk. What it doesn't need to do is tell them exactly how to treat the dogs in that process. So, for example, dogs have very different personalities. They have different, they actually have different kind of places in the pecking order of the group of dogs. And you leave it up to the dog walker's judgment to decide how you're going to get dogs into a car based on what they know about the process, what they know about dogs, and what they know about those particular dogs that they have with them. You don't need to spell that out.
Okay, so how do we humanise this then? We want to put a good process in. We don't want to turn the workforce into robots, but we do want to deliver, for example, a consistent experience for our clients, irrespective of who the client talks to within our business.
Well, the thing to remember is that consistent doesn't necessarily mean the same or identical. What it really means is consistent with your promise. So the client feels equally valued through that interaction as they would with any other interaction with your business, and as they would with any other person in the business.
So the key then, before you develop any process, is to get to understand the business fully.
Yep.
Not only the products, but also the DNA of the promise that you make to the clients. And that comes from all the people within the business, not just the managers or the owners.
Yes, exactly. So a nice illustration of this kind of thing, because it makes it very easy to see for everyone, is I worked with a company that runs dance classes. And their whole model was quite different from the normal dance class in that they provided partners for the clients who knew how to dance. So they'd get lots of young European amateur dancers and they would practice with the clients. So the whole metaphor for that business was kind of Cinderella. You will go to the ball. So the franchisee's role was host of a party. And because they're the host, that means they knew they were organising the teacher, they were organising the venue, they were organising the partners, and they were inviting guests. And the whole ethos of that, the whole promise was, you shall go to the ball.
Okay, so you talk about writing a score, and you mentioned earlier about musical notes. How does that humanise the process?
Well, a score tells your musicians what to play, but it allows interpretation. So, and depending on the personality of the business, there can be quite a bit of play in that. So, if you're a very tight business, you might have every note written, but you probably still allow people to put in their own grace notes every now and then. But on the other end of the spectrum, if you like, you could be jazz. So you can leave 8-bar gaps for somebody to do their solo in. All you really care about is that they end in the right place and they come back in the right place. But they can do what they like in between. Actually, they're going to be in the right key, probably. But the point is there's a lot of freedom.
So there's that adaptability.
There's that, yeah.
Okay.
So I think we've defined what makes a good process. So the question really is, why are processes sometimes not adopted?
So our answer to that would be they probably aren't good processes. Now, that doesn't mean that they're inappropriate processes for the business, but it means that a fundamental step in the creation of that process has been missed. And in my experience, that step is normally the inclusion of the business in its design and creation.
Okay.
So we said before about humanising the process. If people feel ownership, they're more likely to adopt a process. People feel ownership when they have a hand in the process. Finally and importantly, the process has to be achievable.
Yes. So we've talked about good processes, but actually the best processes are those which people use and improve of their own accord.
Exactly.
That's how you really want them to be working. And the best way to do that is to involve them in the design of it.
Yes.
Okay. So what do you think makes a bad process?
So a bad process is one that hasn't taken into account the full promise and capability contained within the business. It's a process that isn't a process, but is actually a series of work instructions. A process that's been designed in isolation without regard for the rest of the business. And a process that isn't kept alive through the implementation, and one that doesn't evolve with the business.
Okay. So how would you identify if you have a bad process?
So I think you have to look to your people. Do you have to keep changing your people, or do you have to keep changing your process to try and adapt it to your people? Is the process actually being adopted and used, and are you starting to see some value from it? i.e., is it helping and adding value, or is it just creating work for work's sake?
Okay.
Once you're happy with a good process, are you saying that you can give it to anyone and they would run it well? No, because different people have different ways of working, and not everyone's working style, if you like, is suited to running a process. So, for example, one of the things I would measure people on is whether they're options or procedures. Now, options people like to find different ways of doing things, new ways of doing things. Even if they've got a perfectly good way, they will look for another way because that's just how they are. Whereas procedures people like to be given a process and follow it. Now, in truth, most of us are somewhere in between. But if you are one of those businesses that likes everything to be quite nailed down, if you want every note played, you're going to need a procedures person. If you're a jazz company, then you'll probably want an options person. So it depends where you are. So how do you include those procedures people in a process design?
Procedures people in process design. Well, you get them to help you set it up. And you get your options people to keep looking for better ways of doing things, as long as they're in line with the promise overall. And for options people, the other way of doing it is you create enough room for variation in the process that allows them to feel they're doing it their way.
Okay. So in conclusion, there's good and bad processes. There are appropriate and inappropriate people to manage or run those processes. But without inclusion, you don't have a process at all. Just a set of instructions. And who reads the instructions when they buy a new gadget?
Exactly. So what do we mean then about inappropriate and appropriate employees?
Well, I think, Kirsten, that's a topic for another day.
Okay, great.